Today's episode is sponsored by Blinkist, the app that lets you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try Blinkist totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've put the link right below this video. All right, so of course we have to start today with Joe Biden selecting California Democratic Senator Kamala Harris to be his running mate yesterday later in the day. Speculation sort of building. We were supposed to hear around August 1st. August 1st came and went. August 8th came and went. The convention starts in just days. So it was time. And we did hear that indeed Senator Kamala Harris is going to be Joe Biden's running mate. This makes her the first woman of color to ever be a VP or presidential nominee, although as many of you know, I don't particularly focus on identity type stuff, but it's certainly relevant and I'm going to talk about it more. Obviously, this pick immediately set off a cascade of criticism from some on the left, and of course, the right immediately going into all sorts of attacks on Kamala Harris's character and Joe Biden's character. Donald Trump saying horrible things about her during yesterday's press briefing, which we were going to look at. But those are sort of details, right? The Monday morning quarterbacking and the rest of it are not where I want to start. Let's look at the pros and cons of Kamala Harris first. And I'm going to go directly first to the worst of Kamala and work backwards from there. But before I do that, there are people who are writing to me and who I'm seeing on Twitter and other places saying, this is a terrible pick, David. Who could possibly be worse than Kamala Harris? Any other person, or at least this person or that person, would have been better. Every one of the supposed finalists had problems. And I think that it's important at this point not to fallaciously imagine that anybody who we might be able to pick out of a hat could have been better, because most of those people weren't actually being considered. The people reasonably being considered were, by Joe Biden's own selection, narrowing a woman, increasingly pointing to a woman of color, although Joe Biden never really said that. But you might remember when Amy Klobuchar removed her name from consideration, even though it had already been removed due to her association in Minneapolis related to Derek Chauvin, the man who killed George Floyd. Amy Klobuchar on her way out said it should be a woman of color, etc. So being able to say, well, what about this person who was never even really up for consideration? That's not the way politics works. We might like it to work that way, but it doesn't. In terms of the people who seem to be finalists, if Biden goes with Elizabeth Warren, according to some, that's a problem because Elizabeth Warren is not a person of color. According to others, Elizabeth Warren would have been a problem because she's too liberal. Others would say, well, Elizabeth Warren is a Northeasterner, and that's not what Joe Biden needs right now, or whatever. If Biden picks Susan Rice, it's pandering to Obama supporters, or it's bad because Susan Rice is associated with Benghazi and the Republicans are going to seize on that, or whatever. The point is, some group would find something supposedly terrible about any one of the people that was being considered, and the Trump campaign would find something to seize on. No question. So we can't really go by that in our analysis. Now, Kamala Harris's biggest liability certainly is her role as Attorney General of California executing the war on drugs. And it was a disaster. It is the exact opposite of what the Democratic Party should be moving towards. Republicans are going to hit her with it, and they're going to hit Biden with it. They will say, we already know they will do it. Donald Trump has done lots for black people. He signed the First Step Act. He's commuted the unfair drug sentences of a list of people. And meanwhile, Biden is picking Kamala Harris. They're going to do it. And okay, that'll be something that has to be dealt with. Now, on the upsides to Kamala Harris, it depends on what's most important to you, but there's a few angles here. Number one, Kamala's 55 years old. She's far younger than Elizabeth Warren, but most importantly, she's way younger than both Biden and Trump, and certainly brings an energy and a dynamic to this race that is completely missing on the Republican side, and quite frankly was missing with just Joe Biden on the Democratic side as well. If you believe that our leaders should be younger than what we've been seeing lately, then this is a positive for Kamala Harris. Number two, Harris is a senator in California. So if Biden wins and becomes vice president, That open Senate seat in California will be filled by Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom until there's a special election. Why does that matter? If it had been Elizabeth Warren who was selected, Republican governor of Massachusetts, Charlie Baker, gets to pick a replacement, and he picks a Republican. And when you're looking at a Senate in the fall where it's conceivable that Democrats could take control, and if they do, it might only be by one, the last thing you want is to lose one of those seats because Elizabeth Warren leaves and then Charlie Baker picks a Republican. So I think that that's relevant. Now, in terms of debating, Kamala Harris is going to absolutely destroy Mike Pence. Kamala Harris, a far better debater than Elizabeth Warren, for sure. Kamala Harris will make mincemeat out of Mike Pence. Remember this incident with William Barr?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney General Barr, has the President or anyone at the White House ever asked or suggested that you open an investigation of anyone?
I wouldn't.
Yes or no?
Could you repeat that question?
I will repeat it.
Yeah.
Has the President or anyone at the White House ever asked or suggested that you open an investigation of anyone? Yes or no, please, sir?
The President or anybody else?
Seems you would remember something like that and be able to tell us.
Yeah, but I'm trying to grapple with the word suggest. I mean, there have been discussions of matters out there that they have not asked me to open an investigation, but
Perhaps they've suggested?
I don't know. I wouldn't say suggest.
Hinted?
I don't know.
Inferred? You don't know. Okay.
Okay, so that's definitely a plus for Kamala Harris. Now, let's step back for a moment. A hearty debate about Harris versus whoever else is great, but we should not lose sight of the reality that were it Kamala Harris who had been president instead of Donald Trump when we were hit with the pandemic, this entire country would be dramatically better off today. Kamala Harris at the top level, unlike Donald Trump, can think. Kamala Harris, unlike Mike Pence, thinks for herself rather than simply being a brown noser. So I'm certainly not going to allow myself to be confused or to miss the forest for the trees and forget that Kamala Harris is someone who actually knows things, who can do things, who can function as an executive, is competent and intelligent, whereas right now, it's the blind leading the blind. That's what we have right now in the Oval Office. She's not as progressive as I would like, okay, and I know that there's debate over this. Trump said yesterday during his press briefing that she's the most liberal senator. And of course, now I would consider Bernie Sanders to be to Kamala Harris's left, Elizabeth Warren to be to Kamala Harris's left. It is true that a few years ago, Kamala was ranked, according to one ranking, as the most left member of the Senate. That's good in my mind, but certainly today, when you look at specific positions on healthcare, for example, okay, she's not the most left. But I'm not going to lose sight of, I'm not going to lose the forest for the trees. Now, one other really interesting thing to think about. Joe Biden choosing Kamala Harris is sort of the antithesis of how Donald Trump operates. And I tweeted about this yesterday, and a lot of people seem to react positively, generally, I would say. When people come at Donald Trump, when people confront Trump, when people publicly say things about Trump that they disagree with, even people in Trump's own party, Trump's reaction is to ostracize them, call them out publicly, and cut them out while assailing their character because his skin is so thin. Joe Biden took his toughest critic from the Democratic primary and the debates. I mean, the biggest conflicts during the primary were between Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And he put her next to him on the ticket. Like him or not, like her or not, this alone is all the evidence I need to know that this is a team that I would choose over Trump, Pence any day. These are adults. Biden has been through so much in his life. It's a joke to think that someone is going to hurt his feelings by attacking him in a debate. And he picked her to be alongside him on the ticket. On the other hand, you have Trump born with a silver spoon in his mouth, a complete narcissist, and we've seen how that has played out with him as president, and the answer is not very well. Now, some of the dumbest takes so far I've seen about this selection One is questioning whether Kamala Harris is really black. That's one that I'm seeing over the last 12, 16 hours on Twitter. Her dad is Jamaican, and Jamaicans are not African American. They are, Afro-Caribbean or something else altogether. Really dumb argument, okay? She's a woman of color, and she's not really African American. Come on, God, that's the argument. Very, very dumb. And then number two, I'm starting to see the idea that Biden didn't choose her, that the DNC chose her, or some shadow puppet masters, maybe Jewish bankers in some cases, chose Kamala Harris because she's friendly to banking. Come on, okay? We're not. That's not the direction we're going to go in here. Policy analysis, yes. We're not going to go in that direction. Last thoughts on this for now. The other reason that this choice is a big deal, and I'm not saying this is good, but it's impactful, is that the selection of Kamala Harris sort of sets the Democratic Party's course potentially for a decade or more. Bill Scher wrote about this, and you can find his tweet about it, linking to his article. He's Bill Scher on Twitter. And Bill Scher pointed out, if vice presidents choose to run for president at the end of their vice presidency, so to speak, which could be, if Biden only goes one term, that could be in 4 years or it could be in 8 years. When VPs run in the primary, they essentially always win. They almost always win, meaning that when Joe Biden picks a vice president, he is picking someone who would have available to them the Democratic Party nomination in 4 or 8 years. Kamala Harris strikes me, in particular because of her young age, as someone who would be well suited to, after being vice president, if she is, run for president. She is decidedly in the center-left Democratic establishment. There's no denying that. We can argue about exactly where she is on the spectrum of liberal to centrist, but she is not part of the populist, socialist-ish insurgency that we saw get behind Bernie Sanders. She's not in that wing. So if we get 4 or 8 years of Biden, and then Kamala, if she wants the nomination, whenever Biden steps back or is done, if it's 8 years, she has it available. We are talking about anywhere between, 8 and 16 years of this type of Democratic Party. A lot of people are not happy about that. And that's something we're going to be talking about more as well. But this is like it or not, this is a very consequential selection and a very consequential election as well. August 23rd is the 15-year anniversary of the David Pakman Show. We will be doing a huge one-day membership special to commemorate this. I invite you to get on our newsletter at davidpakman.com. You'll be notified on the 23rd of something very, very special, something I don't think we've ever seen before on the David Pakman Show. Grab a free newsletter subscription at davidpakman.com. Let me know your thoughts about Kamala Harris via Twitter, where you can find me at dpakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
What if you could read 10 books in just one sitting? That's exactly what one of my favorite apps lets you do. It's called Blinkist, and what they do is take thousands of popular nonfiction books. They condense them down into text or audio that you can consume in 15 minutes. Blinkist makes sure that you're getting all of the important core insights from each book. So it's perfect for exploring a book you otherwise wouldn't have time for. If there's a full book you're thinking about buying, you can use Blinkist to get a sample first. Just think how much you can enrich yourself by being able to soak up an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. I recently read A Brief History of Time, of course, by the great Stephen Hawking. This is a book that I have been aware of for so long, and other things got in the way, and it was fantastic to check it out on Blinkist. Blinkist has books on politics, philosophy, science. They have 27 different nonfiction categories, and a subscription is only about $8 a month, and you get the entire library. But you can try it totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've put the link right underneath this video.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new members of the day are Daniel Bellin and Doug Farron. Thanks to Daniel and Doug for your support. Also, a big thank you to John Rivetti. John's today's longtime sustaining member of the day. John's been a member for almost 5 years, and you can grab a membership for yourself at joinpakman.com. Okay, it is time for Hatriot Mail. Hatriot Mail is when a professional voiceover artist interpretively reads the hate mail that I get. A quick reminder about what Hatriot Mail is, now with a whole slate of new coronavirus-related Hatriot Mail introductions.
Last time I checked, this was America, and I have the right to share my droplets with whoever I want. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
That's a good one. That's a very good one. Okay, let's get right in to this week's Hatriot Mail.
Why doesn't David marry Joe Biden if he loves him so much? You are such a fearful little child, Pakman. Dude's a corporate skill. You have the lamest political show on YouTube. I don't even follow your show. You just proved, David Pakman, that you are relatively ignorant. Your angry caller, Jimmy, is 100% right. And I have no idea why I'm still subbed to this tripe.
This is a playground thing, you know? If you like Biden so much, you should marry him because you're gay, right? I mean, these Hatriots have regressed, or maybe they never progressed past sort of like being 10 years old. It's weird. And unfortunately, many of them are, I know this is crazy, but they're in positions of power in this country. Come on, guys. We're adults here, okay? Biden is good on some issues. He's less good on other issues. He's orders of magnitude better than Donald Trump overall. We shouldn't deify politicians. We shouldn't idolize politicians. And by the way, nobody's forcing you to subscribe to me. Yes, we are on the path to 1 million YouTube subscribers. That's true, but you don't have to be one of them. Hopefully we'll get over the finish line by election day. But if you want to bow out, by all means, do what's best for you. I am confident that there are very few of these haters relative to the people that are signing up. And I think we'll have some very, very big things to announce from the standpoint of 1 million coming to you very soon. Remember that you can use the coupon code HATRIOT40 to get 40% off the membership of your choice at joinpakman.com. The spelling, very important, all lowercase, all one word, HATRIOT 40. Okay, so yesterday Donald Trump had another one of these coronavirus press briefings. This one was particularly bad, even by the standards that we've come to apply to these press briefings. And there was something, Trump seemed to sort of just lack energy. He seemed deflated. It was almost like he had the wind taken out of him just before coming out to brief the press. He seemed maybe out of gas is the right analogy. He was disoriented. He was confused during the brief presentation part. When it was time for questions, he called on mostly friendly reporters, some of whom asked ridiculous questions, and then just slowly walked off after not taking too many questions. Now, the content is, of course, really disturbing. We now have the additional contrast of Biden-Harris, right? And we really start to get the sense, as we think about that and we see the continued deterioration, that almost anyone would have better dealt with coronavirus than this administration. These are just not people up to the task. And I want to go through some of these moments with you. Now, it's almost becoming more sad and depressing than anything else, in addition to being horrifying that this is the guy who's in charge of the country right now. Let's start with coronavirus from yesterday. Again, an administration just out of ideas, no ideas about what to do. They have come up with what is this genius talking point of talking about the percentage increases in other countries. Take a look at this.
But the virus continues to increase in nations across the globe. Last week, France and Germany both recorded their highest daily number of new cases in 3 months. Not that I want to bring that up, but might as well explain it to the media. The 7-day case average for Germany has increased by 62% since last week, unfortunately. and that is truly unfortunate. It's increased 82% in France, 113% in Spain, and 30% in the United Kingdom. Those are big increases. Cases are also rapidly increasing in the Netherlands, Sweden, Belgium, Switzerland, Slovakia, Estonia, and other European countries. And in our country, they're going down.
Now, it's important to note that the reason Trump now talks about the percentage increases in a lot of countries is because the numbers in those countries are still tiny compared to our numbers, even on a per capita basis. So Trump has to say, because otherwise these would be really dumb things to say. I mean, they're dumb anyway, but nobody would fall for them. Trump has to say, percentage-wise, here's what we're seeing in other countries. Now, this is important in two ways. Number one, the reactions in these other countries are completely different to in the United States. In the United States, we've been sort of hovering between when we got down to 20,000 new cases a day, half the country pretended like it was over. We reopened and we got up to nearly 80,000 cases a day. We've now come back from those numbers. So when you never really go down, when you just have a raging pandemic in the United States for what is now many, many months, percentage-wise, you're not going to see drastic changes because it's been bad and it remains bad. In these European countries and other countries, they so successfully dealt with the virus that once you get down really low, even small increases in terms of the number of cases are high increases in terms of percentage. That's one thing to understand about the sort of just arithmetic of it. The other piece is, in these other countries, as soon as they started to see these upticks, they immediately say, we've got to start shutting things down. We've got to expand guidelines. We have to tighten and expand mask wearing, etc. So when Trump points to this, the numbers are deceptive because of how poorly we dealt with it. When it never got good, it's just going to kind of stay bad and even on a percentage basis. But we just continue plodding along like idiots, collectively. Obviously, many of us individually are doing the right things, while these other countries immediately react. Now, the other thing I think it's important to mention is just how small the numbers are in some of these places. You know, Trump mentions Germany. Germany had 436 cases on Monday. We had 40,000. And even on a per capita adjusted basis, we have so many more cases than the countries that Donald Trump is. These are outbreaks that you can't even really compare because they are qualitatively and quantitatively so different. Then Trump has become focused and fixated, really, almost obsessed on college football. He wants college football to start. Now, it's very clear Trump knows very little about sports and doesn't really care about sports. And in fact, videos we've seen of Trump watching sports, he looks very, very bored and doesn't really seem to get sports. But here he is acting like college football is a really, really big thing that he wants to see happen right away.
As we safely restore our great economy and reopen our schools, and hopefully we can watch colleges play football. We want to get football in colleges. These are young, strong people. They won't have a big problem with the China virus. So we want to see college football start, and hopefully a lot of great people are going to be out there. They're going to be out there playing football, and they'll be able to fight it off, and hopefully it won't bother them one bit. Most of them will never get it, statistically. But we know we'll see more cases at some point, and we will eventually develop sufficient immunity in addition to everything else that we're doing. So college football, get out there and play football. People want to see it. And stand for your American flag, stand for your national anthem, because people are not happy when that doesn't happen.
Something about the billionaire president telling unpaid college athletes to just go out there and play and that most of them will be fine, that seems a little bit dystopian to me. And by the way, is it bad that I've been so desensitized to Trump calling it the China virus that I don't even find the need to comment on that? Like, is that a bad thing that's going on? Like it's become so pedestrian almost for him to refer to it that way that it's barely even worth a mention. And in reality, what else is there to say about it? On the facts, by the way, Multiple college football players have already started to develop heart conditions as a result of catching coronavirus. And so, as usual, Donald Trump is also wrong on the facts. Then, of course, Donald Trump mispronounces Kamala Harris's name.
As far as Kamala is concerned, she's a big...
Now, my fellow Battlestar Galactica fans will remember that one. Kamala, I believe, was like a drug that people took in Battlestar Galactica. It's been a little while since I watched it, but fact check me on that one. I think you will find that I am right. More substantively, sort of, immediately, as expected, Donald Trump starts attacking Kamala Harris and says that she's nasty. She's a woman and she's nasty. Take a look.
She had a lot of things happening, and so I was a little surprised that he picked her. I've been watching her for a long time, and I was a little surprised. She was extraordinarily nasty to Kavanaugh, Judge Kavanaugh then, now Justice Kavanaugh. She was nasty to a level that was just a horrible thing, the way she was, the way she treated now Justice Kavanaugh, and I won't forget that soon. So she did very poorly in the primaries, and now she's chosen, so let's see how that all works out.
The nasty to Kavanaugh thing I find fascinating because she actually had the strength to question Brett Kavanaugh the way he deserved to be questioned. And, you know, these guys like Trump, they claim to be super alpha and powerful and strong, and yet they can't stand up to questioning. Trump regularly can't stand up to questioning from female reporters, and that seems to trigger him way more than questioning from male reporters. Kamala Harris asking good questions of Brett Kavanaugh makes her nasty in Trump's mind. And this is definitely a preview of what we can expect in the campaign from here on out. They're so mean. They're so nasty. They're being so horrible to us. Well, you just don't like it when your narrative is questioned, when your echo chamber is pierced. That's all it is. Then Trump again just struggling to speak. Here he keeps repeating anarchists for some reason, and he keeps repeating it until he gets it wrong. Take a listen.
They really are anarchists. These are left-wing anarchists. They are anarchists. And I'm directing the department.
Very strange. Very strange. He also talked about plasma rather than plasma, although I won't, that's like every day. I'm not even going to play that for you. And then lastly, again, sort of a very down, sad Trump throwing out some last smears of Kamala Harris before hanging his head and just wandering away from the podium after taking only a few questions.
Or modify it to a point where it's essentially no longer the Second Amendment. I would have thought he would have gone a different way. Thank you very much, everybody.
So what do you think? Does Trump gain anything by doing these press briefings? Kellyanne, these press briefings, you'll remember, they started slowing down. And then they stopped altogether after the disaster where Trump wondered aloud about maybe injecting bleach or isopropyl alcohol in order to treat coronavirus. Kellyanne Conway then suggested publicly the reason Trump's approval is down is he stopped the briefings. And he shortly thereafter restarted them. And, you know, what is true is that the polls have been tightening since he restarted them. Causation and correlation are two different things. And I think we can probably point to other explanations if we want to look for them. But is this helping Trump to some degree? Or is he doing more damage? Does it not matter? We hear about ratings, but at the same time, most of the country is not watching these. Let me know what you think. We will have continued coverage of the fiasco, just ghastly press briefings on the David Pakman Show Instagram. That's David Pakman Show. And we also, of course, every day have the full hour audio podcast available around 3 p.m. Eastern. If you prefer a long form audio version of the show, you don't have to watch clips on YouTube. I love it when you do, but if you prefer the sort of long-form audio format that you can take with you easily, you can subscribe to the daily audio podcast on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, really whatever your favorite podcasting app is.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show depends on your support, and the easiest way is through membership, which includes the world-famous bonus show, as well as commercial-free audio and video streams of the show just for members. Sign up today at joinpakman.com. Coupon code saves you 40%. Vote soon 18.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Okay, let's continue as it's been a very, very busy 24 hours. Donald Trump, as I mentioned yesterday, had this super low energy coronavirus press briefing. It was just bad. He seemed deflated. He took only a few questions, mostly from friendly reporters. And then after smearing Kamala Harris and mispronouncing her name, he just sort of stalked off the stage in the way, really, I've only ever seen Donald Trump do. Very, very strange sort of dynamics and posture to it. And of course, what comes out of his mouth is not much better. Apparently, feeling like he needed a booster, last night, Donald Trump called into the Sean Hannity propaganda program on Fox News to, I guess, sort of try to have a better showing than he did during the press briefing. But what's not been working out super well for Trump on Fox News is that he gets fed the most softball of softball questions, and he still manages to either mess it up or say something that actually acutely worsens the situation for him. And it's like nobody can make the guy look good, almost nobody. Although I'll tell you at the end of this segment who I do think manages to make Trump look less bad. And Trump went on Fox News, spoke to Sean Hannity last night, calling from the White House, trying to take some of the attention back from the news cycle of Joe Biden selecting Kamala Harris to be his running mate. And it was really weird and it was really bad. And once again, I have to ask, how is it that these interviews keep happening again and again and again? Clearly, we know that the people around Donald Trump have no control over him, but also even the friendly interviews go bad. Like even Sean Hannity, who's Trump's friend and is not interested in anything that we would call journalism when it comes to Donald Trump, even he can't get Trump a sensible interview. So let's look at some of these and hope that in a few months, this type of nonsense from the Oval Office, because that's what this is. This is not, some, as some like to pejoratively call them, this is not some basement show with two viewers interviewing some unknown person. This is Fox News interviewing the President of the United States. Hopefully in a few months, this type of nonsense regularly coming from the Oval Office, emanating from the Oval Office, will be relegated to the archives as this happened and it's now in the past rather than the day-to-day. First, here is Donald Trump insisting that this is going to be a rigged election, and this has worked. Later in the program, I'm going to tell you about new polling that confirms this strategy from Trump of saying it's going to be rigged, it's not going to be fair. It has worked, and it could actually lead to chaos during election day, election week, maybe we should be calling it. I'll explain that later, but here is Trump himself saying it.
It's common sense. And an absentee ballot's okay, where you send in for a ballot, they go through a process and they send it to you, and then you send it, it's fine. But these mail-in ballots where they send millions of them all over the country, it's going to be a rigged election. And this country shouldn't allow it. The courts have to step in. We're in many different courts right now. If the courts don't step in, the federal courts, you'll never know who won the election.
So this is now on repeat. This is just, he's saying it multiple times a day. Trump pretending, first of all, that there's a difference in practice between absentee and mail-in voting. Now, every time this comes up, somebody will email me and they'll say, David, there is a difference between absentee and mail-in voting. There's a difference in theory. Okay, we could have a universal mail-in voting system that would be different from absentee voting. This time around, when we talk about mail-in voting, what we mean is expanding absentee voting, which Trump says is okay, so that everybody can get an absentee ballot. In some states, this means sending everybody a ballot who's registered, not dogs, not undocumented immigrants. In other states, it means sending everybody who's registered an application for an absentee ballot. In other states, it means you still have to apply, but saying I'm worried about catching coronavirus would be a valid reason to vote absentee, when traditionally in many elections, you would not have that freedom. You would have to, your reason for wanting an absentee ballot would have to be justified in another way. So again, Trump pretending there's a difference. Operationally, practically, there is no difference between mail-in and absentee this time around. And again, Trump does allude to the various lawsuits that he's filing, that is a real concern. That actually might work to gum everything up. And we're going to talk about that later as well in my segment on the strategy to steal the election. That's coming up later. We'll continue in our sort of tour of the horrors of this interview last night. Here is Donald Trump complaining. I mean, he's just so whiny. Have you ever seen a supposed alpha complain and whine as much as Donald Trump, saying he was impeached over his so-called perfect phone call?
A disgrace. They play a much dirtier game. They'll impeach you over a phone call that was perfect. Nothing like that's ever happened before. They impeached me over a phone call that was absolutely perfect. You couldn't have made a better phone call. There was nothing done wrong with that phone call. And they play a much dirtier game, a much tougher game than the Republicans.
What do you think it's like being Hannity in these interviews? I'm not saying I envy the guy, and I'm also not saying I feel bad for the guy. I'm just saying, what do you think it's like? You're Trump's friend. Hannity is Trump's friend. Hannity gives Trump the softest of softball interviews. You can barely, you can't call it journalism. You can barely call it an interview. And Trump still goes off the rails into these disjointed, aimless tangents. Does Hannity worry that, like, wow, I'm not even doing anything that we would call journalism, and still Trump doesn't look good? And then somehow Trump gets onto the topic of ranting about Pulitzer Prizes and New York Times reporter Maggie Haberman. It's so weird what Trump gets obsessed with. Anonymous sources also a topic. Take a look.
They got it wrong, and they got Pulitzer Prizes. The Pulitzer Prize is worthless as far as I'm concerned, because when you have the Maggie Habermans getting a Pulitzer Prize and she got it all wrong, I haven't spoken to her in forever. She's like my biographer, like she knows everything about me. She knows nothing about me. And they talk about they have sources. They don't have sources. They're made up. They make them up in their mind. They have no sources. I know when there are sources. But if you look at the Times and I guess the Washington Post, they got Pulitzer Prizes, and they were totally wrong.
Imagine being so arrogant that you think you know about any story a newspaper publishes, whether there are really sources or not. Now, I'm not going to bore you again with the confusion that Trump has had for years about what anonymous sources are. Remember, Trump doesn't seem to understand the difference between a source that's anonymous in the sense that a media outlet doesn't publish their name versus a source that is anonymous to the reporter, okay? In almost all cases, when we talk about an anonymous source, what we mean is the reporter knows who the source is, but they are not publishing the identity of that source. Trump, in many cases, seems to think the reporters don't know who it is that they are dealing with. Anyway, the level of arrogance and narcissism is really something else. And then here is Trump on the same day that we have the first woman of color as a presidential or vice presidential candidate in the United States, insisting he's done more good. Done more is one aspect of it, but done more good for black people than anyone other than Abraham Lincoln, as he likes to say.
I've done more for the black community than any other president other than perhaps Abraham Lincoln.
Now, here's just a final little thing. Donald Trump still unable to say the word Minneapolis.
Send in the National Guard and solve the problem like we did in Minneapolis.
Just every interview. I mean, you have the full spectrum, mostly. You have a spectrum of Jonathan Swan pushing back in the Axios interview last Monday night, all the way to, on the other side, Sean Hannity just letting Trump rant, and he never makes sense. He never looks good. He can never hold it together, no matter what the setup, no matter how freely and uninterruptedly he's allowed to just say whatever he wants. Sometimes I actually think the interviews where Trump comes out looking best, and I alluded to this before, we've seen Trump on Fox News, Fox and Friends, Hannity, Jeanine Pirro. We've seen the gamut. We've seen Trump in press briefings. We've seen Trump with George Stephanopoulos and with Jonathan Swan. It's always a disaster. Trump comes out looking the best where, understand the level of babysitting that has to be done by the interviewer. Trump comes out the best on interviews, for example, with the Christian Broadcasting Network. Now, I'm not saying that when Trump is interviewed by CBN, he makes sense or he explains policy or any of that. What I am saying is just letting Trump rant it's bad for Trump. He looks bad. CBN goes further. On CBN, the interviewers will sometimes rephrase what Donald Trump says to make him look coherent. That's the level of involvement you need from an interviewer, even a friendly interviewer, to make Donald Trump look good. It's not just don't challenge him. It's don't challenge him and then rephrase his answers and respond to them like he's being insightful or intelligent or coherent. And the place that does that is Christian Broadcasting Network. There's probably some other. I think that he did an interview with some guy from Barstool Sports. I didn't even know the guy, but that was a couple of weeks ago where, again, Trump wasn't making any sense. It was a friendly interview, but the guy who interviewed, Dave Portnoy, I believe his name was, Dave Portnoy, if I'm remembering correctly, would actually react and respond as if Trump was making sense. And that's the degree of help Trump needs in order to come out of an interview looking even semi-coherent. It's incredible. Incredible that that's where we are today. Let's take a quick break. Remember that you can follow me on Twitch for frequent live streams, I will say, at twitch.tv/David Pakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show depends on the support of our viewers and listeners, and one way to keep us going is through Patreon, where you can pledge as little as $1 per month or as much as you want at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Great perks and benefits as well. Read about them.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So Donald Trump really may not need to steal this election. We actually have the latest 538 projection, which says that there's a 71% chance Joe Biden wins and a 29% chance Donald Trump wins. You might recall those are very similar numbers to 2016. And in 2016, of course, it went the way of the 29%. So we're going to deal with that tomorrow. But the point is, Trump may not need to steal the election, but he's not taking any chances. And he's going to try to steal it because why not? If you can do it, why wouldn't you do it? Now, without redoing my previous commentary on the race being closer than these double-digit polling leads suggest, I'll remind you, when Joe Biden is up 9 in a poll with a 3.5 margin of error, that means Joe Biden might only be up 2 in the popular vote. With a popular vote win of 2.2 in 2016, Hillary lost. So I won't redo the entire commentary, but the point is, when we see these leads for Joe Biden, we really have to assume nothing. And in fact, the 538 forecast, which I'll go over in detail with you tomorrow, supports this very, very closely. But what we should know is this is going to be an election that if Trump can steal it, he's going to try to steal it. And we need to understand all of the ways in which he's going to try to do that. First of all, Donald Trump has been saying, oh, this is going to be an unfair election. He's trying to make it unfair. Donald Trump has been saying this election will be rigged. Well, he's the one trying to rig it. Trump has been saying vote by mail won't be reliable. He's the one trying to make it unreliable by kneecapping the post office. And Ryan Cooper wrote a good piece this week in the publication The Week, called Donald Trump is Trying to Steal the Election. And he outlines the various tactics and strategies and approaches that Donald Trump is employing. And there's actually a lot of them. And whether we can fight all of them at once or how we do it is sort of the next question. But we've mentioned some of these before, and I want to put them together in a list. So first of all, I mentioned this already. Donald Trump is trying to break the post office. The idea is if people are going to vote by mail, if states are going to expand absentee ballot access, break the post office so that it will be less likely to succeed. In polls we've looked at, Trump supporters, among those planning to vote in person, 2/3 are Trump voters. Among those planning to vote by mail, almost 3/4 are Biden voters. So you see right away why Trump would try to break the post office. That's one strategy. Number two, Donald Trump is trying to fine tune and fine time a stimulus, a second stimulus, so that it will be best positioned to essentially buy votes. And part of this is that Donald Trump has said, I will defer payroll taxes if he can, right? We'll see if he can actually do it. And if you reelect me, I will make the deferral a permanent cut. Okay? So he's effectively saying, I will defer your payroll taxes for now, but unless you reelect me, when you file your taxes next year for this calendar year, 2020, you will owe the money you saved on the payroll tax. But if you reelect me, I will make the deferral a forgiveness. It's trying to buy votes. The right loves to say, oh, Bernie's trying to buy votes with free stuff like healthcare, which would be paid for through taxes. This is really trying to buy votes, saying, I'll save you some money for now. You're going to owe it back by April 15th of 2021, unless you reelect me. Okay, trying to buy votes. Number three, Donald Trump is trying to delegitimize the election, to weaponize his followers, taking to the streets after November 3rd, and it is working. We have a new poll which shows that 2/3 of Republican voters now believe that the election may not be fair. I'm going to talk about that later in its own segment because it's so important and such a big deal and really is the goal of all of this. Donald Trump is using lawsuits to try to turn the courts. Remember that the courts, one of the biggest successes, if you can call it that, one of the biggest accomplishments of the Trump administration is, mostly thanks to Mitch McConnell's help, getting 2 Supreme Court justices confirmed, one of which should have been Barack Obama's selection, Merrick Garland, and getting hundreds of lower court judges confirmed. So Donald Trump is using lawsuits, and he's being open about it. He's talking about, we've got this in court, we've got that in court. He's trying to use lawsuits to turn the courts in his favor after the election and to try to prevent vote by mail. So there's two sides to this. Use the courts now to try to block vote by mail in different states and start laying the groundwork to, if there's a challenge after the election, have courts that maybe will be more predisposed to rule in Donald Trump's favor. And you might remember that for a couple weeks now, Donald Trump has been warning it could take days, it could take weeks, it could take months. Trump even said it could take years to know who won the November election. That's not going to happen. But the point is, Trump is trying to ensure that it takes longer than it has to with the lawsuits, with the destruction of the Postal Service, so on and so forth. Now, again, Trump might not need to do this stuff. Trump might be able to win without suppressing the vote, without turning to fraud. But it's possible that the only way Trump can win is with these tactics. And this very well could end up being the craziest presidential election that the U.S. will have ever had, at least in the modern political era. So what do? Come on, you guys know what we do. You know what we do. We vote early, ideally. They can slow down your ballot. Trump can slow down your ballot by having Louis DeJoy, the new postmaster general, who is a Trump donor, restrict overtime so that mail piles up in post offices, look at trying to shut down some post offices or whatever. But if you mail in your ballot 3 weeks early, even if it's slowed down by 1, 2, 3, 4 days, it's going to get there. And presumably it's going to be counted unless Trump figures out a way to mess with the actual election and voting precincts themselves. They can close polling places. But if you plan to vote early, you will be less affected by that. So put the mask on or do the mail-in thing or whatever. Let's do this. We know now that it is Biden and Harris. Could not be more different than Trump and Pence. For all of the complaints we might have about a lack of perfection in this ticket, and certainly there are many, and be aware of when and where you can start to vote early. I'm going to talk about that a little bit in the next segment, but a lot that we can do and a lot that we should be doing. Okay. I really need everybody to understand this because this is so important. The strategy by Donald Trump of saying that the election will be unfair and rigged is working. If it wasn't convincing anybody, We could ignore it. It might be no big deal, but it is working. Donald Trump has convinced 65% of Republican voters that the upcoming election might not be fair. This is a poll based on more than 44,000 U.S. adults with a 1% margin of error. Now, here's what makes this really tricky. 65% of Republicans question whether the election will be fair. 46% of Democrats also aren't confident that the election will be fair, but the devil is in the details because the concerns about fairness from Republicans are very different than the concerns about fairness from the Democrats. And it really comes down to understanding these details. Republicans who think the election might not be fair are falling for what Donald Trump has been saying, which is mail-in ballots will be riddled with fraud. We won't know the election results for a long time. They are rigging it. That's what the Republican voters have fallen for. Democrats, on the other hand, are worried that Trump is making the election not fair by breaking the post office, by filing lawsuits, by trying to suppress the vote, so on and so forth. Preventing vote by mail, purging voter rolls, doing all of the things that Republicans have been doing for decades to try to win elections by suppressing the vote. So these are not asymmetrical concerns. If you glance at the numbers and you say, okay, well, it seems like Republicans and Democrats are basically in agreement, just to slightly different degrees. 46% of Dems think the election might be unfair. 65% of Republicans, no big deal, slight party difference. The reasons why they think there might not be fairness are what is so dramatically different. And what you have to understand in order to really synthesize this properly is the history of voter suppression. Historically, Democrats try to increase voter turnout, period. They just say if more people vote, we're better off in general. Republicans have employed a strategy of trying to limit voter turnout in very particular and specific ways. Polling shows that it's Trump who will most likely or more likely need foul play in order to win. Democrats simply want the election to happen. They want everybody who wants to vote to get to vote, and they want every single one of those votes to be counted. And it's true, if that happens, it's better for Joe Biden. We know that to be true. The president is the one who realizes that he might need voter fraud and voter suppression to win, as I told you in the last segment. And the scariest thing is that it's working for Donald Trump. Our concern for a long time has been, if it's close in November and Trump claims it was rigged and it activates his followers, many with their guns, to hit the streets, that could get very ugly and it could happen very quickly. It could happen within hours of whenever Trump claims the rigging took place. So when we hear that there are, gaps in the confidence people have in our voting systems, we can't forget that one side is the side that tries to lower turnout in order to win, meaning a ton of Trumpists are happy that the election might not be fair. This has always been the point of attacking it, and this is why it will continue unless we stop it. This is how it starts. This is how you weaponize people to hit the streets, maybe with guns, to demand that you be kept in power. These are not inconsequential or trivial matters. Now, what can we do? If you want to find out how and where you can vote early, check out the page called Early Voting by State on vote.org. We're linking to that page in the description to the YouTube video for this story. And you will very quickly see that every state is different. Here in Massachusetts, for example, early voting starts 11 days before. This is in-person early voting. Starts 11 days before the election. In Michigan, it starts 45 days before the election. We're getting close to that. In Florida, early voting starts at least 10 days before the election, if not earlier. So understand that. Understand what the rules are for voting absentee in your state. You probably, in most states, you probably already can request an absentee ballot. I've already done it. I've received my primary ballot for the September 1st election, and sometime after September 1st, I'm going to be receiving my absentee ballot for the general election in November. Understand all of these things, figure out how you plan to vote, and then let's activate whoever we can and make sure that people that are already on our side plan to vote, particularly when, Trump wants to make it difficult to vote. But the reality is in most states, it's actually easier than ever to vote with early voting, with expanded absentee ballot access. There's no excuse for not voting this time around. And many people, metaphorically, this time around, are willing to crawl over broken glass in order to vote. Some would literally do it. I'm using it metaphorically. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's just a little break from the depressing politics. There's a really funny debate going on in our audience right now about whether I am providing too much of a setup for the video and audio clips that I play on the show. Here's a caller who thinks I should be providing more of a setup. Take a listen to this.
Hi, David. I'm calling in heavy support of your usual format of preloading us before you play a clip. In normal presenting of information, I love the idea of getting straight to the content and then analyzing it after, and I respect those who requested that. However, when it's in the case of stuff coming out of the the Trump administration, or Trump himself, it is so full of spin and gaslighting, which is kind of abusive, that preloading us with information, for me, really helps relieve the pain of having to hear it, and it also it is like a vaccination against the upcoming spin. Makes me much more immune to it when it actually hits. So I'm in strong support of your front loading of.
Okay, so my idea for years has been, I'm not like I'm not a video playback technician. The idea here is I'm giving you my take. And so I try to prepare people for what we're going to see. And I certainly give more of a lead up to clips than some other hosts might. And it was deliberate. I was doing that on purpose. And every once in a while, I would get emails from people saying, David, just give us the clip and then analyze it so that you're not tainting our view and sort of priming us to believe one thing or the other. Then after, tell us what you think. And by that time, we'll have made our own sort of judgment of it. And I tried that yesterday, and I've tried it a little more recently. And I have to tell you, overwhelmingly, the reaction was, no, David, don't just play the clips. Don't be a video playback clerk, essentially. We are here for you to give us context, and the context before is actually important. So this is not a huge deal. It's an interesting difference of opinion among the audience, but point taken, and the response overwhelmingly in the last 24 to 48 hours is, please go back to the old way. Tell us what we're about to see. And we can still say we disagree with you, but we like to see what is your take on what we're about to see. So I'll probably go back in that direction. We have a great bonus show for you today. One of the things I want to talk about is, why is the post office being discussed in business terms? And what I mean by that is, the post office is a public service, and President Trump and his donor Postmaster General Louis DeJoy, they're talking about it like it's a business and it should be evaluated and handled like a business that is supposed to turn a profit. That's not actually what it's supposed to do, and I want to address that on the bonus show. We're also going to talk about the reality that Donald Trump, although he is now assailing the character of Kamala Harris, actually donated to her multiple times. We'll talk about that. And then lastly, Lebanon's leaders were warned in July about explosives at the port, according to some documents, and we are going to explore that in detail. All of this is on the bonus show. Get instant access to the bonus show by becoming a member at joinpakman.com. And remember, August 23rd, the 15-year anniversary of the David Pakman Show, we will have a huge one-day membership special. To be notified of that special, get on my newsletter. It's free at davidpakman.com. Thanks so much for watching today's full episode of the show. Just a reminder, today's sponsor is Blinkist, the app that lets you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try Blinkist for free and save 25% off of a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've also included the link right underneath this video.